All right, so we start with the story of Athens. Athens today is a city of about 5,000-6,000 people. In Paul's day, I'm going to retake on that, 5 or 6 million people. And in Paul's day, I was thinking ahead to what I was going to say about Paul, only 10,000. And would you believe that it was actually probably about only 1/20th the size of Corinth at that time? But it still was a very significant centre, as you're going to see as we journey along. So as you come to Athens, the obvious thing that you see as you come into Athens, and here is a photograph actually showing you what's known as the agora or the marketplace, the old marketplace from Paul's day, mostly overgrown, it's shrubs and bushes, overgrown, some old stones and statues and monuments and so on. And then when you look, that long building, I am going to take you into that. You can see that on your left-hand side. That's the Stoa, and just explain the Stoa and what that was about for Paul. And then you've got the market area where he walked amongst to see all these gods, and then he went up onto Mars Hill, but beyond Mars Hill, what you're looking at is the Acropolis in the top right-hand corner of the photograph. Just underneath the Acropolis, so much so, even though it's about 100 or so metres above the level ground around it, there's another little mound called Mars Hill, and that's where Paul went as well. So that's our journey. That's where we're going to go. No matter which angle you look at the Acropolis, at Athens, how could I forget the word? The Parthenon. The Parthenon just stands out, standing right up there on the top of the Acropolis, and it's something of great significance that I believe Saul would have been in. And as he expressed in our passage that we're looking at today in Acts 17, very concerned about all these gods he saw around. So let's get in a little bit closer to this. Here we are, heading towards the gate or the entrance into the Parthenon. It's actually known as the Propyle, I think it might be pronounced, and that's the entrance where we head in and up through the gate itself, and then eventually are faced with this massive Acropolis, a massive Parthenon. It is something really to have a look at. But first of all, just before we go past the gate, out on the right-hand side, right on the corner there of the Acropolis, is the Temple of Athena Nike. And this is one of 3 of the temples found on the Acropolis. It became a very significant temple in its time. Nike was regarded as a very special one of the gods. In fact, so special that they actually made a wingless, because if you are aware, and I'm sure you are because of Nike clothing, shoes, etc., if you are aware, Nike, the goddess, was a winged goddess, but here they had a statue of her wingless because they didn't want her to leave Athens. That's how much they regarded her. And so she was placed as wingless there in the monument. Then there's another small Erechtheum temple. This was a temple that actually had 2 gods being worshipped here, Athena Polygus and also Erechtheus Basidium. Right, is the full name there of the other god. That was in this particular temple. Right on the front there is what's known as the Porch of the Maidens, or the statue of the maidens there. And that's always been a well photographed and a very meaningful part. And not completely certain about the earliest history with these maidens, other than they were just the columns holding up the porch. But it seems in time that different things were associated with the maidens there. In fact, it was during one period of history when the Turks occupied the Athens that the king's harem actually occupied this particular building as well. All right, so let's go on. Here's the one, the Parthenon, that really grabs our attention. It's huge. And the interesting thing is, while, yes, it took them about 30 years to build this from beginning to end, and I have visited it now, from the first time I visited to the last time I visited, I guess we're looking at about 35 years, and there's always scaffolding there rebuilding it. How come it takes them longer to rebuild it than it did to originally build it without all the technology that they have today to do the building. Nevertheless, here we go. Let's have a look at it, the Parthenon. This is what's known as the east end. It's the end that you see first as you come in, and different amounts of scaffolding or cranes or whatever there each time I've been there. This is going down the side of the Parthenon. And you'll notice there also that there are some of the columns are in full colour, the stony colour that you see there. In other parts it's white. That's where they've had to improvise and put in some other pieces because it's been lost in history and time. Otherwise, there are original pieces that they're using there. This is the western end of the Parthenon, and it doesn't look much different from the other end. It's a shame that the apex of the roof isn't there, but what I found very interesting is that in this apex here, there were monuments and statues all the way, and you can just see in the corner. Now, there's a new museum which has opened up just in recent years, a little further away, or probably about 1 kilometre away from the Acropolis. And this museum actually has most of the original stonework from the Acropolis in the museum, and what's actually out in the one on the in the Parthenon on the Acropolis is actually copies. All right. However, in this case, you are actually looking at the Piedmont of both ends on the building, and all the different monuments and statues of different gods, different people in the history of the Athenian people. And so, you know, that was quite interesting to see that. And how would have been mighty to see. I mean, you go back and have a look again, that's just one tiny little corner. And how mighty would it have been to have seen all those right through from the beginning right through to the end of them. All right, but we have to go inside. And there's no record of this in Scripture that Paul went inside the Acropolis or inside the Parthenon, sorry. But it's quite likely that he did, and this is quite likely about as close as we can get from an artist to work out what it would have looked like in Paul's time in the 1st century. It's an 18th century drawing with, here's the great, the maiden as she's known as here, the great Athena Parthenos. And, you know, she was the one who was worshipped over the time. She was a war god. Certainly, if you look at the history of her, you know, protecting during war, but in addition to that, she was also regarded as a virgin goddess. She was the goddess of reason, of intelligence, as well as interest in and support for art and literature. Very big influence, and was found so often in so many places around Athens and in the classical period of Greece history, and certainly in the time when Paul came through here, the culture was still around, even though the city may not have been as a neighbouring city, Corinth. A replica, would you believe, of the entire Parthenon, and in this case, Athena, the maiden, a replica of that has been made in Tennessee to scale, and you can see the gentleman there standing beside the goddess Athena. Athena, in this particular replica, is overlaid with gold, as she was originally, but only for about a short 20 or 30 years before, unfortunately, because of I did write this down somewhere, the wars in, no, I'm not going to find it quickly. No, I won't find it, doesn't matter. Anyway, there were wars around about the beginning of the 400s BC that actually meant that the Greek people were in need of a bit of money, wealth, so they stripped all the gold off the statue, and this is basically what was left. It's a marble statue, and that's pretty much as it's believed the statue would have stood in Paul's time again. So you can imagine Paul seeing all this and saying, whoa, this is just incredible, you know, these gods that these people worship, and that's only one, or we just noticed 2 or 3 of them there for that. But from there we go down from the Acropolis and we come into the Agora, or the market area. And the Agora is certainly, there's still plenty of evidence around for there being once many statues, many images that were worshipped here by the people as they went about their business in the marketplace. For example, this was the base of the altar of Zeus. There are recorded as being, it's believed that there's possibly as many as 3,000 statues of gods, goddesses, and prominent people in the history of these people were found in bits and pieces and parts around Athens connecting with the past. That's incredible, isn't it? And many of those, particularly those that connected to the gods they worshipped, were in the actual agora or the marketplace. And you can see here, looking down, and I think this is actually looking down from Mars Hill, over the marketplace, you can see some of the statues there, or the remains of them as you see them today. There around the marketplace. Many of the statues that they have found and the images have been taken into the various museums. And here you're seeing one of the museums, which we'll come to in a moment, and we'll talk about it a little bit more in just a minute. So Paul's seeing these images all over the place, all through the agora. And then in the agora, it's kind of been a little bit out of sight from photographs I've been showing you so far, but in one corner of the marketplace, there was another temple. And this temple is probably the best preserved Greek temple there has been anywhere in history. Not only has it been used as a temple for worshipping the god, as you can see there, that's the Thesion, I think it's what it's known as. The Thesion was worshipped here. But in addition to that, this temple, after the overthrow of Greece and then the oncoming of the Islamic, or that was a little bit later actually, of the Christian era, it was overtaken and used as the Christian church. As was, by the way, up on the Acropolis, the Parthenon up there, it was used for 900 years as a temple for the ancient Greek people and their gods, goddesses. And then it was used for 900 years, and instead of Athena in the church, there was a Mary. For 900 years, the church used it. Then the Islamic invasion came through, and guess who took over now? It's been a Muslim mosque for a period of time until it was blown apart by gunpowder, simply because the Turks, who were controlling Athens at the time, were using the Acropolis and the Parthenon as a storage place for their gunpowder. And unfortunately, their enemy discovered that, and they lit it up and blew the whole building apart. And that's what the restoration has been about today. So this is the history of the area. Now, here's what I want to mention as another interesting place. This particular building you're looking at here was reconstructed in 1956. But it was a building that existed. In fact, if you look at the ends of the building closely, you can see the original parts of the original building, same size, 115 metres long. And it was a building known as the Stoa of Attalus. Attalus was the original king, I think, from Pergamon, who was responsible for the building of this building in the 2nd century BC. So it was there in Paul's time. The building is a 2-storey building, and looking now, we're on the bottom floor. It's basically a massive porch. I would say it would take up, in comparison, similar size actually, from the wall there to about the aisle here was all porch with another row of columns down the middle and an outside row of columns. And that small section there going right down the building was 21 rooms. That was all, again, markets. And this was public meeting space. And the people of Athens used these stores a lot. There are many of them found in many different places, and not only in Athens but in other places for classical Greece as well. And of course today the rooms are used for showing you many of the artefacts and some of the statues again, and you see them outside. This is upstairs now, on the upstairs. They haven't finished supplying or opening up the rooms there, so they have in the porch area upstairs, they have again some monuments on display, heads, etc. It's an amazing place to go to and see it. And stop and think of it now as, did Paul go there? I'll bet he did go there and walk through the markets to see more of these images, statues up there as well. And probably to mingle with the people, because it's pretty obvious that that's what Paul was doing. He was mingling with the people, trying to get a lead. And finally he got his lead. He headed off, and before we get to Mars Hill, he headed off to, it says, the Jewish sanctuary or temple. And he there reasoned with the Jews and the Greeks about Jesus and the resurrection. The Jews and Greeks, being a people who had itchy ears and loved to hear something new, listened to him and said, hey, you got something to say, something new. Haven't heard all this. Come up to, and he was introduced to the Areopagus, or what is known as Mars Hill. In fact, in the King James, it uses Mars Hill only. But in my NIV, it has both Mars Hill once, and then the Areopagus is used on other occasions to describe this. So Mars Hill is easy to define. We're looking down from the Acropolis on the top of the Mars Hill. And now we're going to look up. Here we are, standing between the Acropolis and Mars Hill, and heading to where you can see, if you've got a close enough vision of it, you'll see there are steps that are cut into the stonework that people walked up onto the hill. And by the way, on the right-hand side, there's a bronze plaque there of Acts 17 and Paul's sermon that he preached here on Mars Hill. But in actual fact, the top of this hill was, while we call it Mars Hill, that's the Roman name for it. Mars was the name of the Roman god for war. The Greek name for it was Eros. No, hang on, got to get this one right. The Greek name for it was Erios, was the Greek goddess for war. And that's where the name came from. But how was the name used? Well, the name is used confusingly to us, perhaps, as we pick up and try and work out in our... Well, is that the hill that was called Areopagus, from the name I've just given you? Or is it Mars Hill? What are we talking about here? Well, Areopagus is the name that's given to that hill as well, but it was also the name that was given to the council that met on this Mars Hill sometimes, not always here. Sometimes they met in a building down in the street. And by the way, there were times when there were even buildings on the top of Mars Hill as well. Now it's totally cleared off and you're there on the raw rock. And you can see it's pretty rough and you've got to be pretty careful as you look around here. And you can imagine Paul up here being brought up now to speak to the Areopagus, the council. We want to hear you. What have you got to say? And so Paul heads up here and he shares his message. Now, I'm not going to share the message because that's what you're going to do in the Sabbath school class in a moment. You're going to share the message that he preached there on Mars Hill. And finally, you remember how that there were two major groups of thinkers there amongst the Greeks at that time. And it was the Areopagus and the Stoics. Very different in philosophy. Until in the end, some said, oh, well, we'll hear you a bit more on this matter, and others rejected him outright. Probably if you understood the background to the two particular groups that are mentioned, you may understand why there was this division. It's a little bit like Pharisees and Sadducees when Jesus got into discussion with them. Because for the Stoics, I think I wrote this down somewhere as a definition. It's in my pamphlet, I don't have it with me. But the Stoics, they believed in, living a good life and being a good person and everything in order to be in the afterlife. But there was no resurrection. You just went straight from here to there, to the afterlife. They were obviously influenced by the Greek philosophers that came before them. Whereas the Epicureans, they were probably our typical, today we might call them hedonists. They were more along the lines of, eat, drink and be merry, for tomorrow we die. We might as well live it up now. There's no afterlife. And so you can see how some were prepared to reject Paul, but I think probably it was the Stoics who wanted to find out a little bit more about what he was talking about, this resurrection, that's where he finished his discussion. It was on the resurrection. The last thing he mentioned that divided the council at that particular point in time. And so that's the place where it all happened. And I pleased to see, actually, this last time we were there, that there's actually a cross now has been put back on the Mars Hill to remind us again that this is a very significant place for the Christian church. This is the place where Paul gave this mighty speech and the impact of it. And the impact of it is probably seen when you go down again downstairs. There's a plaque there and some history, and I've just enlarged a little part of this for you to pick this up, because right at the end of our verses that we're looking at today, it mentions there was one Dionysius who was an Areopagus. So he was a member of the council. He was one person who accepted what Paul was saying and became a Christian, became a believer. And this little part of the informed information that you can see there on the plaque actually tells you that in the middle of the 1st century, when Paul's there preaching, that Dionysius, who actually hears Paul, accepts what he says, and then becomes a follower. The next thing that they put on here, not only did he become a follower, but also he built a church between where you are here at, it's just a little further north actually of the Mount Mars Hill. He built a Christian church there. Later, a very large church was built in Athens in honour of this man as well. But it's tradition, the church tradition says that this man actually became the first bishop of Athens. And yeah, it's just an interesting little connection with history and the record there that's recorded in the scripture.